There are three key details that make T1 land plots objectively harder to play, but not necessarily worse. And I'm going to cover all those three things, and then there's one bonus thing that's actually going to make T1 plots way better than they were before, and that's because they were already really good for blueprints. There's going to be some really interesting things we're going to talk about. A bunch of stuff Johnny said in the Discord. Let's jump straight into it. The first one here is how the fuel converters are going to work in the future. So he says, for example, here, I'm sure we can zoom in, the intent for beta is to have a percentage chance for anything under 10. You can ignore that for now, but basically, if you are due 0.7 fuel, 70% of the time you get 1, and 30% of the time you get 0. So let's break down what this means really quickly. Basically, you know how you have efficiency on your converters? If you clump them all really close together and they're all on, say, 25% efficiency, then that means 25% of the time you're going to get that 1 fuel from a level 1 converter, and that other 75% of the time you're getting nothing. Currently in the beta, you would always get a minimum of 1, which gives a really big advantage to T1 plots because they can stack things and don't need to worry about efficiency too much because it really doesn't give them enough of an edge. But now they won't have a choice. They're risking losing pretty much all of their fuel supply from stacking them all together. And that might be the better strategy, but that is basically how it's going to work. Now, there are going to be some minor changes to this, and I even saw Johnny mentioning that things like you're going to gather them over time and the tick amount will be different. For example, it's not going to be like after 24 hours, it's going to calculate if you gain that 1 fuel. It's going to be like after 12 hours, it's like you've gotten 0.5 of a fuel, but you won't be able to collect it until you've reached that 1 mark. So that is all going to work quite differently, but that's also going to really play into efficiency. So if you're on a 50% efficient, then after 1 day, you're only going to get 0.5 of a fuel. So you'll have to wait 2 days until you get that fuel instead of the 1 day like it is right now, which makes it even harder to play T1s, especially since fuel is so important in upgrading your buildings. The second thing we're going to talk about is plants no longer give credits. Dimitri says it here, and Johnny says it in a different bit just around here as well. But basically he says that you will no longer be receiving credits from plants, and instead there will be main goals that will reward you credits. Now, why is this interesting for T1 in particular? None of the other plots have any issues with credits, all right? So if we assume they're all getting the same amount of credits at the same speed, but it's overall going to be a bit harder, you'll have to spend a bit more money to do so, T1s suffer the most because what T1s needed to do was speed up a lot of actions. For example, if you had a T1 converter and it was getting 1000 carbon, but your next upgrade costed 3000 carbon, you would then need to speed it up 3 times to be able to get to that next upgrade. However, with a T2 or a T3 plot, that 3000 cost is the same, but they're generating a lot more than 1000, sometimes 2 or 3000, especially on a T3 plot. And so you need to spend way less credits on speeding up production, which I'm sure some people didn't, but that is objectively the one time you would have needed to is on a T1 plot. So it makes them that bit harder to play, which I think is good. I think they should not be as good as T2s, T3s, and T4 plots. But don't worry, I'll be getting to something that really benefits them. The other thing is the podarium, and that comes into effect with what we're about to talk about, but it's also a disadvantage. You can see here that it says quite a bit of stuff on the podarium. I'll go check it out in the Discord. But what's really interesting here is this right here. Now, I don't have confirmation on this yet. I've sent a message in the Discord. If you want confirmation, go check there. I'm sure they've responded. The mutated plant can be cleared for free. But what does that actually mean? That means that non-mutated plants, I would assume, will cost you resources. T1 already does not have many resources. The other tiers, they have plenty of resources, especially tier 3 and 4. T1 does not have that much. So if it needs to clear plants to really optimize its land, that's going to slow it down even more. Arguably not nearly as much as these other two things, but it is going to have an effect. So you need to keep that in mind. However, the podarium now has this thing called dyes. When you clear these mutated plants for free, you get dyes, and these give you extra variation on your different blueprints and skins and items, and let you get different sorts of cosmetics. And the one single best reason for a T1 plot has been and always will be the diversity of regions, right? You can get a Tiger Boreal, a Shard Bluff, a Crimson Waste, all really cheap, and you can have a large diversity of regions. And now it's going to be even more helpful, really maximizing the amount of land plots you have to try and get as many dyes as possible. You'll hopefully be able to transfer those dyes between plots or whatever it might be. And then when you do, you can get all these custom skinned variants. And a T1s will be a really great way to acquire all those items. As I said, its fuel prospects are kind of weakened now, and they were already not great to begin with. But now their blueprints and their cosmetics and their gacha elements are even better than it was before. So if you want to get those blueprints, if you think that's where it's at for Illuvium and Illuvium 0, then T1 plots might just be your best option. Have a good one.